Hi, my name is Mike Moore, and this is my wife, Julie. In the fall of 1983, I was in my senior year at Bible college, and during that time there was a young girl by the name of Myrna who had come to our school and was just a freshman that year. That night we had devotions with one another, a time in which we were able to study the Word of God. And Myrna and I talked and visited for a while. We enjoyed our time together and sharing with each other about how we love the Lord and different things like that. And then just before I got ready to leave, she asked me if I would do a prayer with her. And I said, sure, would you like me to pray for her? And she said, I'd like you to pray for my sister. My sister is somewhere in Lincoln, Nebraska tonight, and we don't know what's going on with her. She's on drugs. She's sleeping in her old station wagon. I think that's what it was at that time anyway. And she's sleeping in her old station wagon, and she her life is just terrible right now. And I remember looking at Myrna and saying, sure, let's pray. Little did I know that I was praying for my own wife, future wife, to come to know the Lord and ask Him in her heart. I remember the first time when I was at Citadel the following year, I'd come back to help out in the local church that was in the area. And while I was there, Myrna came walking down the path at the school, and I looked on out there and saw her. She was so excited, and she looked at me and said, oh, you have to see my sister. She's here, the one we prayed for, the one we prayed for. And I looked down, and that's when I first met Julie. But I'll let her tell you a little bit about what had happened the night before.
Well, I was getting ready for Bible college, and a friend of mine had decided she would give me a perm. And the perm did not go well. She had never given a perm before and completely ruined my hair. So I had to go to the beautician, and the only thing they could do was to buzz it, kind of like a Marine burr cut. So I'm coming on campus, newly saved, and unless I had my dress on, they probably would have put me in the boys' dorm because my hair was super short, probably shorter than the boys. And this was a Bible college. And that's when I first met Mike.
And it was at that moment when I looked down and I realized, freshman, this is not for me. We'll have a good friendship, we'll be able to talk, but that's about it. And for years, Julie and I were just friends. After I graduated, she would come on up to our Bible camp up at Rockhaven, and she'd help us out with our kids and things like that. We enjoyed each other's company. At one time, we were actually engaged to each other's friends. And for both of us, it just didn't work. And during that time, Julie was in her senior year. Several years had passed. We had talked here and there. We knew each other now. And during that time, Julie came on up to our camp one night. And I'll never forget that one night when you came on up to the camp. And how that during that night, her and I began to talk. And we talked, and we talked. And it was from about 9, clean on up until about 2 in the morning that we talked that night together. Julie went on back down to the dorm, and I looked and I said, boy, I wonder. Then I said, nah, that'll be it on that issue. And we just said goodbye the following day. And it was a time that I'll never forget, though, because I really realized that night I had a friend. And Julie and I would correspond every once in a while. She began to write. Matter of fact, I still have the first card that Julie ever sent to me. For those of you who are old enough to remember, Julie sent me a Ziggy card, an old cartoon. And in that card, Julie had written something like, Mike, I'm so sad to hear that our school is closed. My heart's breaking, but at the same time, I'm now looking forward to what God has in store for me. I'm working here in Lincoln and getting ready to help out with the Christian school here. And I remember reading that card, and it didn't quite read that way. It basically said to me, hi, my name's Julie, and I'm excited about you and me getting together. That's not quite what Julie had in mind, though.
It was a very loose translation.
Very loose translation. So during that time, we began to write one another often. While I was in Chicago, I was working for Moody Bible Camp at that time, doing a weekend retreat. And while I was at the weekend retreat, I had just gotten a picture of Julie. Well, 3 or 4. And as I looked at them, I looked at my map. I looked at the cards that she had sent. I looked at all the letters because I'd already begun keeping them in a little stack hidden in my car. And I remember looking at the picture, and I remember looking at my map. And as I looked at my map, I didn't think that Chicago, Illinois was that far from Lincoln, Nebraska. Really didn't look that far anyway at that time. And I remember looking at that thing and saying, you know, I think I'll see Julie. I've got about 4 or 5 days here where I can do that. I gave her a call, and she said, sure, come on up for a little bit. Nothing in her head had any romantic motive whatsoever. Nothing. In my head, when she said sure, that was just a sure engine saying she wanted me. So I got in my car, which was an AMC Hornet, and I drove through the night. The only problem is in that Hornet, there had gotten to be a leak of massive amounts of air. It was cold. It was almost winter-like weather that night. And as I was driving down the road, I got a severe, severe cold before I went and saw her. When I drove into Lincoln, Nebraska, by this time my nose is dribbling, my head is pounding. I'd been up all night with the kids. And as I drove on into Lincoln, Nebraska, I'll never forget coming into Lincoln that first time, and I was driving down one of the roads. I'd been up over 20 some odd hours, and all of a sudden I realized I'm on a one-way street. While I'm on that one-way street, all of a sudden I'm going, oh man, I got to get out of here. It is now a early Sunday morning, around 2 in the morning when I hit the inside of the streets. And the next thing I saw were cop lights coming on me.
All the bars had closed, and so all the traffic was coming at Mike, but he didn't realize that.
Did not know. Meanwhile, the cop pulled me over. I didn't know what to do. It was at that moment that I did what any red-blooded American would do. I got out of the car and I began to cry. The cop, who had his book open, ready to go at it with me, folded his book, put his arm around me, and he said, son, are you okay? And I said, sir, I'm just a little boy from Arkansas, and I've lost my way, and I don't know where I'm going. The cop was kind enough towards me, gave me directions to the general vicinity of where I should be going, and as I left, I remember driving, and I was now in a perplexing situation. It is now something like 3:30 in the morning, and as I'm getting close to where I need to be, the problem is on top of this hill where I thought Julie might be living. This is back in the days, guys, before GPS, where I thought that Julie might be living. As I looked at the top of the hill, there's lights in the upper bedroom. The other place, I went a little further down, just down below that hill, and there, all the lights in that house were off. Well, of course, Julie had to be waiting up for me to say hello. So I went back up to the top of the hill, and I proceeded in honking my horn, pounding the door of the house for over 30 minutes. Nobody answered. Going back and forth, I finally realized I've got to call her. It was at that moment that I found out that, yes, I'd been pounding on the wrong door. As a matter of fact, the lady in the top of that place was their neighbor. And that lady was, as we found out later on, paranoid. She was also probably very frightened as she heard all the knocking and honking of horns at that early morning. Julie and I talked and visited for the next few days. And one day, just before I got ready to leave, I think it was the day before I got ready to leave, I decided I needed to take her out to a place to eat. A place that would be nice, romantic. And the key word?
Cheap.
Cheap. I looked at her, the lady that she was staying with, and as I looked at her and talked with her, I said, you know, I need to take Julie out, but I really can't afford a lot because I'm a missionary. And she said, I know a perfect place. She said, why don't you go to Kay's? So I went to Kay's restaurant with Julie that night. Problem was, while I was at Kay's, remember, I still have that vicious cold. I can't feel anything. My head is throbbing.
So bad.
So bad. I am blowing my nose constantly. I'm not feeling well, but I'm now at a nice restaurant with Julie, and we're sitting just from across from each other. We're having this nice green salad. And on our first date, this is what happened. While we're sitting there having that nice green salad, I know that I am fascinating her with every word that I'm saying. I know that I have her attention because she can't take her eyes off of me. What I didn't know was the following thing.
Well, because of his head cold, he also had a thick mustache. And with that mustache, nobody really tells you how to handle some unsettling social situations.
No.
These things cannot be taught. Apparently, you just have to go through them. One of them was watching your date with a head cold, and it's running down his mustache, and you are deliberating and praying for wisdom because you don't know what to say. You're hoping that he can feel it, but realizing with this mustache he can't. You're getting totally grossed out, and yet you're trying to be kind and polite.
It was at that moment that I realized something. I thought that she was really, really getting into my conversation. When finally she looked at me and she said...
It was horrifying. I said, Mike, I think you might need a Kleenex. Right, it's just... And then I thought he would grab a Kleenex and blow his nose, but instead...
This is what I did. I just went, what? And as I pulled my hand away, I could see the trail leading to a long distance.
Like green silly string. Not good.
I did not know what to do, so I went to the table next to us, as the restaurant was pretty well deserted at that time of day. I went on over to the table next to us. It was a very nice restaurant. Once again, I bring this up. And I picked up the cloth napkin. I took care of the situation, and I continued to blow. I blew forever. And as I blew forever, I did not know what to do. Because now I have the clean napkin, which is now not clean. So I did what any red-blooded American would do at that moment. At that moment, I folded the napkin, put it back on the table, and put the silverware on. From that point on, all that Julie wanted to do...
Dinner at that point was going quickly because I wanted to get out of there before some poor soul opened up that napkin and had a heart attack. And hopefully it wasn't a health inspector.
So I took Julie on back home. The following day, as I got ready to leave, I thought to myself, well, it's time for me to go. She looked, she was outside, and I said, well, I better go now. She said, well, good, I guess so.
Have a safe trip.
Have a safe trip. I looked at her and said, well, aren't you even going to kiss me? To which she responded by saying,
why would I do that?
To which I said, well, just to tell me goodbye. It was at that moment that she lowered her head. I kissed her on the on the top of the nose of her bridge. A bridge of her nose. And as I did that, I got back in the car. I drove off saying, God, this is the girl you're going to give me. Julie, though,
was just as convinced that God was not leading, and then I was off to Argentina as a single missionary with a friend.
But we continued to write. Julie with the dream of leaving, me with the thought of continuing with my work with North Arkansas Gospel Mission at that time, which would later on become Rock Haven Ministries. And we continued to write off and on. And this went on for what, maybe 2-3 months. Mm-hmm. Our friendship had been longer than that, but as far as writing and stuff, another 2-3 months.
We were talking on cassettes and sending them in the mail so we could listen to each other's voices because we were poor. I was a Christian school teacher. Mike was a missionary. Neither one of us had much money, and we could only talk once a week on the phone. During the times before cell phones, when minutes were cheaper after 11 o'clock. So that's how we were able to kind of talk with each other without creating a big bill.
We would talk about once a week, and it was usually on a Saturday night. And this one particular Saturday night, I began to talk to her, and as I was talking to her, I shared with her about how the ministry was going, how the kid, how we had seen many kids come to know the Lord, how all these things were taking place, and right there in the middle of it, for some strange reason, I just went, and things are going very well. I mean, the camp's going good, and I just love you. I love you a lot. And then I remember just continuing on with the conversation. It was during that time when all of a sudden there was a phone noise on the other end in which Julie said,
What did you just say?
The kids are doing well. Everything's going, that we saw lots of kids get saved. And it was at that moment she then again said,
No. What did you say before the kids?
Oh, I love you.
Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. I can't believe that you can't seem to have a friendship with a sister in Christ without having to go all weird about it. Why can't you just appreciate our friendship for what it is?
Okay. I remember picking up the phone and she said, now, you cannot call me for the next 2 weeks. You can call me 2 weeks from now, but not until then. You cannot write me a letter. You can do none of these things until you grow up. Are you okay with that? To which I said, yes, I'm okay. I hung up the phone, fell to my knees, and cried for a good hour, knowing, this is what I thought you gave me, God. My heart was broken. Yet at the same time, Julie, on the other hand, was thinking to herself as she hung up, grow up. But something happened during those next 2 weeks, and I'll let Julie tell you a little bit about that.
Well, the mail, Mike's letters and cassettes, stopped. Obviously, I asked him to do that, and the Lord was using that to help me realize I was starting to miss him. And then as I was starting to miss him, Joyce, the older couple I was living with, Bob and Joyce, they're with the Lord now, but she mentioned that perhaps I was missing Mike's letters for a reason. And I was like, well, I just enjoy his fellowship. And she said, well, maybe it's more than that. And I didn't really think too much about it. And then I kept missing his letters and cassettes more and more. And I realized, and I decided I needed to spend a night in prayer praying about it, because I thought I was pretty convinced God wanted me in Argentina as a single missionary. And I thought maybe Satan was dropping something in my life that was good, but not my best, and a distraction and all those things. And so I spent some time in prayer, a lot. And in fact, I was on my knees all night over it. And by the end of that, I knew that God had changed my direction. Instead of going to Argentina, that I was to be with Mike. And so when I realized that, I was kind of discouraged, because I realized I have to tell Mike. After that conversation of me chewing my dear one up like a bulldog with a shoe, then I realized I was going to have to admit that he was right.
This is where we call this Al Pacino's kind of love, in which Julie had to be dragged into love. During that time, for those 2 weeks, my heart was heavy. I wound up, finally on that Sunday night, I think it was, on a Sunday night, I wound up knowing that this was the night I had to call her up. It was now 11 o'clock. It was also storming. Rain was coming down in buckets that night. And as I'm thinking about all this, all I can think about is talking to Julie. When I get to my friend's house, I'm so excited because I'm only about 10 minutes away from having to call her. I'm too impatient, and I said, okay, I got to pick up the phone now. And as I picked up the phone, all I could hear was dead on the end of the line. What had happened was lightning had struck in the area and had knocked out the telephone wires. I remember looking at my friend, whose name was Steve at that time, and saying, Steve, I don't know what to do. And Steve, being the romantic he was, with the rain pouring down, looked at me and said, Mike, here is my telephone credit card. The only thing I know of is you can go about 2 miles down the road. You know, right over there by that busy highway. And I said, yeah, There's a telephone booth outside. Now, for those of you who are younger, remember there was a day in which people would actually go to places called a telephone booth, drop dimes, nickels, and quarters in it, and talk to the other person on the other end of the line. The only problem with this telephone booth was the telephone booth was outside right by the highway, and the rain was pouring down.
No shelter around it.
No shelter. Yeah. But I had to do it. And I remember Steve looking at me and saying, "Do it for love." I jumped inside the car. I went down the highway as fast as I could. My time was slowly ticking away. A matter of fact, I knew that when I jumped out and I got ready to call her, it was already about 3-4 minutes after. I got on the phone and we began our conversation. It was during that conversation when I could hear Julie say, "Mike,
I love you."
But before I heard her say those words, right about that time, she had also said, "Mike, I've got something important to tell you. Mike, and a big semi went past." Now remember, this is late at night. The neighbors across the street had all their lights out. As I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, "You what?" And Julie said, not in such a sweet tone this time, she said, "Mike, I think
I love you."
At that moment, another truck had went by, but I had heard her. It was then that I stood in the middle of the rain and I said, "I'm sorry. I don't think I heard you. Could you say it one more time?"
You would think this would be a good request, but at this point, it took a lot for me to tell him I loved him. The words did not come easily, and I thought he was pulling my chain. And so at that point, the romantic part of it was gone, and I was starting to get cranky.
She said, "Mike,
I love you."
It was at that moment that I dropped the phone and began screaming. Julie automatically thought that
he was being mugged. I was getting ready to call 911.
She was scared. I began screaming at the top of my lungs. Also, across the street where the lights had all went out, all the lights turned on. Once again, I found out later on that was a much older couple who were probably scared out of their wits. I'll never forget that night as I stood in the middle of the rain, hearing the words, "I love you." It's now been over 25 years, and we thank God for those years. We thank the Lord for those times. This isn't our normal type of blog, but we wanted to be able to record this, not only for you, but for our girls' sake. We just pray and hope that you have a great day today, and we'll be starting again with our blog again, probably within the next week, and we'll be looking through the scriptures again. May God bless you, and may you have a great day.
Bye-bye.